Fair is foul and foul is fair. That's Macbeth for those of you that don't know. And today we're talking about Macleod Bethel Thompson leaving the CFL for the USFL. That is foul, but you know what? That is fair. We're talking about CFL quarterbacks. We're talking about XFL, USFL, NFL. And you know what? We're going to talk video games and everything in between. And you know what? At the end of this, we're proposing change. Big change. One man is to blame for the change that we're proposing today. It's not my fault. It's not Sheldon's fault. It's Macleod Bethel Thompson leaving the CFL for the Spring League, the USFL. What's his problem? What's the CFL's problem? And now what are we going to do?
All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to The Ride with Chevy and Nasty. Really appreciate you guys joining us today. Chevy, it's good to see you again. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, Sheldon. It's good to see you. As we launch this thing, it's exciting. There's lots to talk about. You and I are big CFL fans, and it was the week of CFL free agency.
Well, in fact, a little earlier this week, we got to join the Rider Nation podcast, speaking with Maz and Kelly about just that, trying to dissect the big moves in the CFL this week. And as always, in the CFL, a quarterback-driven league, the big story was the quarterback.
Yeah, we came out of that discussion. It was really fun, by the way, talking CFL again, feeling like we know a thing or two, even though we don't really know anything. But what was evidently clear after that discussion is really there was a big move in Hamilton with the signing of Bo Levi Mitchell just prior to free agency. And then there wasn't much left for the Riders and the Alouettes to do. And they in essence swapped two quarterbacks that really didn't have great seasons last year. So it wasn't like a big free agency move. The big moves happened around the quarterback position. But as we got further and further into that discussion, Sheldon, we really uncovered the fact that the CFL is really lacking in terms of quarterback development and the presence of quality guys that can step up and play. And I think we saw that in this free agency period where there were two teams that needed a quarterback, and really all they did was swap two mediocre guys, and it doesn't really bode well for the league. And then you and I on the way home, because we always like to talk, and we continue the discussions off the air, before the air, off the air, we started talking about, what happens with these new spring leagues coming in and what that could hold for the CFL. So today, I think when we look back to the week that was, Sheldon, not only is it about the quarterbacks in the CFL, but it's to be or not to be. We lose Macbeth, Macleod Bethel Thompson, 2 days or 3 days into CFL free agency, announces he's not coming back. Sheldon.
Well, and that's been the talk of the offseason. I mean, obviously, here's a guy that took the long way up to pro football. He had a couple of stints with San Francisco, and I think it was Tampa Bay back in the past. But now as a 34-year-old quarterback, he's finally established himself as a starting quarterback in the CFL, takes it all the way to the championship, wins a Grey Cup. And he's left with a decision: do I stay in Canada, where I'm excelling for the last 2-3 years of my career, or do I go back to the States, join my family, get that better balanced football family balance, and maybe have an opportunity to, I don't know what his end goal is. But to me, that's the biggest concern is if we're losing quarterbacks like that to the States, what does that mean for the future of Canadian quarterbacks and where we're going to find our talent from? Like, you played a lot more recently than me, and you spent time playing in the NFL south of the border. What do you think was the draw for Bethel Thompson to go back south?
Well, Sheldon, I think first of all we have to back up because the headlines are saying Grey Cup winning quarterback leaving the CFL for the USFL, which is a little misleading because he wasn't winning the Grey Cup when he left the game in November. In fact, it was Chad Kelly, the nephew of Jim Kelly, that came off the bench and rallied Toronto versus the Blue Bombers to win that Grey Cup. So him leaving might have been already foretelling of a story that could have been playing out in Toronto this year. We don't know. But the fact remains is he was up here for about 5 years, as you mentioned, a few stints in the NFL, and now he's looking back. He's like, what next? Now, 34, 35-year-old quarterback with starting experience in the CFL, going to play in the USFL, as he mentioned, primarily for family, is great. But I think there's also that lure of maybe someone in the NFL will take a look at him based on him playing in a spring league. And I think that's him betting on himself. I think that's him thinking, you know what, I'm going to take one last shot at this because the NFL can offer his family some generational wealth. He's leaving the CFL in pretty good situation. Obviously, he does have the pedigree that he got his team to the Grey Cup. He's played long enough in the CFL to establish himself as a decent starting quarterback. I'm not going to say he's a world beater. It's not like when Ricky Ray left the Edmonton Eskimos back in 2003 after winning a Grey Cup and signing with the New York Jets. This is an intermediary step to that, and this guy was more of a middle-of-the-pack quarterback, I would say, if I'm evaluating the quarterbacks in the league from last year. I mean, he's certainly behind Bo Levi Mitchell, who's sitting on the bench. He's certainly behind Zach Collaros, certainly behind Nathan Rourke. I would even put him. Well, I actually love. I was going to say Mazzotti. It's not Mazzotti. It's Mazzoli. What's the quarterback
Mazzoli,
for Ottawa? So I certainly put him down in 5 or 6 of the quarterbacks in the CFL, and so him going down, I don't think is a huge loss for the CFL if we had a pipeline of quarterbacks, and that's the problem.
That's the problem right there. So when we're talking about sort of the mediocrity of quarterbacks in the CFL right now, and we talk about some of the other standouts, Nathan Rourke, obviously, an exceptional young Canadian quarterback, just made the move down south as well. But then you look at the number one guy right now, Bo Levi Mitchell. And I know he's had options. He's considered going down to the NFL before. Why do you think that he didn't do that? Back when he was in his early 30s or late 20s, and he was clearly an exceptional quarterback in this league, why didn't he make that move?
Well, I think when Bo Levi was at the height of his success with Calgary and he had an opportunity to go to the NFL, he didn't go because there wasn't the interest there. And the interest wasn't there because he was playing the Canadian game. And the spring leagues didn't exist. Why didn't he do it now? If Macleod Bethel Thompson says, you know what, I'm going to take a flyer on myself, I'm going to go to a spring league, and I'm going to play a year and maybe do well, and then maybe an NFL team takes a shot at me. Why didn't Bo do that? I think the reason is this. Bo is almost too established in that he makes a certain level of money in the CFL that's probably comfortable for him. He signed for $500,000 with the Tiger Cats. That's no chump change. You cannot make that in the spring leagues. In the spring leagues, you're maybe making $60,000 US for 10 games. You're maybe getting some bonuses for victory, but it's a big difference between the $500,000 that he's making in Canada, even when you take the exchange rate. So I believe for a quarterback like Bo that's established, any of the other established quarterbacks that are making those high six figures, they're not jumping to a spring league to make peanuts in the hopes of getting to the NFL. Now, if an NFL team calls Bo Levi Mitchell and says, hey, we want you to play, I'm sure he would have jumped. But I don't think that call came.
See, and I think that's one of the things that you hit on there earlier too. Back at that time, there were no spring leagues, and we have this sort of assumption. Wow, that's an amazing quarterback. He's got a shot down there. But you and I have both played major American football, and it's a completely different game, and probably no more so than at the quarterback position. Like, even if I'm a strong Canadian quarterback, but I've been removed from the American game for 5 years. Mechanics are the same, but everything else is different. The reads are different. The throws are different. If you look at an out in the CFL, you're throwing the balls in the air for 40 yards or more. So from that standpoint, if I'm an American general manager scouting talent, I don't know what I have in some of these guys, right? And
that's right. Yeah.
And I think like you said, once a guy's established here and he's making a few $100,000 a year, he's got stadiums full of his jerseys, and you get to be a bit of that big fish in the small pond. One, it's pretty comfortable to stay here and not take that chance. But two, like you said, there wasn't until now that opportunity to go down south. Yeah, it's only 60 grand, but it's 10 games. It's 6 grand a game. That's not terrible. And it's a short season. So I think the way the guys are looking at it almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a 10-game audition for the NFL. It's not a career. It's a 10-game audition to get up to the big league.
I agree. So when you and I played, the only spring league that really existed was the arena football. And we had guys that kind of flipped back and forth. But there was nothing that so closely matched the NFL game, which would be considered the pinnacle of the pinnacle for many of these young players coming out of the U.S., than the spring leagues that exist now. And if these spring leagues are successful, and we're talking about the USFL and the XFL, and they continue on, I do believe it's a threat, because a young guy coming out of college previously didn't have many options if he was a quarterback. Come to the CFL and not just learn a game with some different nuances. It's a completely different sport. You've got a larger field, a longer field. You've got 12 guys on offense with different types of motions. You've got 12 guys on defense. The defenses are completely different. For a quarterback to become successful in the CFL, and we've seen it time and time again with these big college names or NFL names that have come up, not only do they have to be good at the position technically and fundamentally, they have to be able to learn a completely different sport in a very short amount of time. CFL training camps have always been historically about 2 weeks. Maybe a quarterback comes up a little bit early, but you have a very limited amount of time to go from everything you learned in the U.S., which is 4-down football, 11 men on the field, to now 12-man football on a larger field in Canada with a different ball and all these different 3 downs, all those things, right? So you're teaching a guy, and it's very rare that someone's finding success. And when you find that successful quarterback that comes up here and does really well, whether it's Bo Levi Mitchell, whether it's Nathan Rourke, whether it's Zach Caliros, they tend to stick around, and you tend to not have backups for them because it takes so long to develop these quarterbacks. Now, these young quarterbacks coming out of college, now they've got options. They've got the CFL, which is an 18-game season, which is not very friendly in terms of having an opportunity behind the CFL. Like, I certainly don't think the BC Lions wanted to lose Nathan Rourke, their biggest franchise player, to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They weren't hoping for that to happen. It happened because the window was right and he performed at the right time. But they want to lock up their best players. That's what the CFL is about. I mean, that's what you want. You want players to stay in the fold. Whereas these spring leagues don't have that same restriction. They're actually encouraging players to come, develop, and hopefully be a platform for them to continue on. And we saw it with you and I. We did a show a few years ago where we talked about PJ Walker, who had just played in the XFL during the COVID pandemic. XFL shut down. Well, he signed with the Carolina Panthers. And then when Teddy Bridgewater went down, this guy wound up starting a few games. And I think he's still around. And then Taylor Heineke for the Washington Commanders. He was, had the long journeyman career, same as you mentioned earlier with Macleod Bethel Thompson, in and out of training camps, in and out of practice squads, on the street, went to play in the XFL as well. When it went under, he went back to selling insurance and I believe completing his engineering degree. And it wasn't until the end of, I believe it was the 2021 season, where 3 quarterbacks got hurt, he got his chance to shine and he leads his team to the playoffs and then signs a big deal. So when guys like that are having success coming out of these spring leagues that play a rule system that's so similar and so mirrored to the NFL, why would they consider coming up to CFL? So I don't think the CFL has a problem of losing current talent like with Macleod Bethel Thompson, because I do believe he was an anomaly. I think he saw a situation was going to happen in Toronto where he might not have been the guy going in and he was going to have to fight again to make a CFL roster. So why not fight for an XFL or a USFL roster with an opportunity to go to the NFL?
See, that's I think if I had it to do over again, I love the CFL. Like, I enjoy the game. I enjoyed playing here. It was at that time, if you're not in the NFL, it was a great league to make your living at. But looking back, would I have taken that opportunity to take that 10-game audition? Yeah, absolutely I would have. For the guys that feel they're close, maybe you didn't come from a big enough college, maybe you had some injuries for whatever reason, you fell off the radar going into the draft, or you're just a bit of a late bloomer, which you see all the time. A 10-game audition league where you can still make decent money to justify your time and risk for injury. Because you remember when you're 24, 25, all you wanted to do was to play. If somebody's going to offer you $60,000 US, yeah, why wouldn't you, right?
Yeah. Sheldon, in 2003, I was a free agent. I had just finished my third season professionally. I had finished with Edmonton. We won the Grey Cup, and I went to the States and to try and get back in the NFL. And one of the ways I tried to do that was to sign with an arena football team. I would have tried to play arena football for the spring to get some more game film, to get some NFL scouts to come and take a look. I wound up signing with the Jets pretty early on, but when you're in the States, they don't have to, the NFL coaches don't have to go too far. The people coaching in the USFL and the XFL are actually, many of them, former NFL coaches that have those connections, that have those contacts. It would be the same as saying, the CFL, after U Sports, many Canadian football players, they'll continue playing professionally in Europe or semi-pro. They'll go play, in Switzerland and Germany. Many of these countries have smaller leagues where these players can continue playing for 2-3 years. The CFL does not go scout Canadian players in Europe. They don't say, oh, that guy won the Stuttgart Bowl and he was a really key player for Stuttgart. Let's bring him to the Ottawa Red Black. It doesn't happen. And I think that's the same thing that American players see in coming to the CFL. You can make a nice career up here, but the odds of getting back to the NFL, which is many of their dreams, is not necessarily possible. I mean, look at Nathan Rourke. If you want to take any better example, a Canadian playing QB in the CFL and one of the best. It was the best we had last year, and he even said his dream is to play in the NFL, and he's pursuing that dream now.
And let's not forget this either, though. Nathan Rourke is only, 3 years out of university? So he's a guy, he's played major American ball. He's got that down. He excelled there. He's excelling in Canada. But I think one of the things, too, from an NFL standpoint, not only do they not want to have to retrain a player to the American game, which is an adjustment. I mean, I know when I first joined the CFL after 4 years at Iowa State, it was crazy, the adjustment I had to make. And that was as a defensive lineman. But I think at certain positions, the NFL is going to look at you and think, we're going to actually have to untrain your CFL habits. Because like you said, it's a different game. Back to Nathan Rourke, I think the big advantage that he had was that he was only 3 years removed. He excelled quickly in both leagues, and he's a guy that they're willing to take a chance on. My concern going forward, though, like I said, there's 2 8-team leagues with 50 players. That's 400 players per league. That's 800 players. Now, from the CFL standpoint, that means there's 800 players that are going to chase the dream south of the border, and we may not get a sniff at these guys up north. And I don't think we've really discussed or fully understand what that's going to mean for the CFL. I mean, we've always been competing for quarterbacks, and we've always had to find niche players, the short quarterback, the shorter receiver with good hands, guys that wouldn't necessarily have gotten a look right away coming out of college. But now there's 800 of those guys focusing on the spring leagues.
Well, Sheldon, I think if these spring leagues continue to, grow, it always remains to be seen with startup leagues. We've seen many in our time start and fold. Obviously, if you look to the XFL as an example, they have a lot of finances behind them. They have a marketing machine in The Rock and his people financing and also promoting the league, and they tend to do well with any businesses they run. But they have to pass a litmus test and survive past year one. And if they do, I think what I see happening in terms of the end result for the CFL is that there may be more pro-trained quarterbacks that would consider the CFL at some point, but I think we'll get them a little bit later. I think what's going to happen is, the young 24-year-old quarterback coming out of U.S. college will take a crack at those spring leagues first to see if it could be a pipeline into the NFL for them. But once they've kind of passed a certain age where the spring leagues are now looking to younger guys and they're not making the NFL, I think that's when they become, or the CFL becomes a viable option for them. I believe the CFL is going to have to pay some of these quarterbacks a little bit more than what they were paying quarterbacks in the past, because now with a professional pedigree of, let's say, a season or two in the XFL and the USFL, but not necessarily NFL pedigree, these quarterbacks might command a higher price in the CFL. But I think at an older age, these quarterbacks coming up can make a nice living for themselves in the CFL. So there might be a benefit to those spring leagues. It's just we're not going to see these guys come in right away out of college. So there might be a vacuum.
I like that idea, though. So, yeah, even if you have to pay them more, though, if the CFL actually looked at those spring leagues as a development league in themselves, yeah, you're not getting that kid out of college at 22. But as you know, like you see these guys coming out of American colleges, it's just the game blows their mind because of all the different nuances. Fast forward, give a guy 4 or 5 years. He's now a starting quarterback. He knows how to make his reads. He knows how to approach a professional game. He's understanding that he's never going to make the NFL, or his chances are, his window's sort of passed. Those would be excellent prospects because you have a developed, trained professional quarterback. I think your odds of finding somebody to come up here and actually make the team and contribute with some good football goes up a lot, getting those players. So maybe it's a development league for both leagues.
Right, but the problem is always going to be this with the CFL, and people always wonder why we don't have many quarterbacks. It is hard to train someone in a new sport, and that's what people don't realize. They say, oh, it's different rules. The rules make it a different sport for these guys. So even if you have a guy that was successful in college and successful in the XFL, successful in the USFL, doesn't make the NFL, and he's ready to play in the CFL, it does not mean it will translate to success. And that is an issue the CFL will have to address. Do we make rule changes? Do we say, you know what? We want to attract the best players and we want to put them at their best. Do we just change the rules to go NFL and keep everyone in line with what's going on trends-wise? Because game-wise, everyone's comfortable watching that NFL set of rules. Now, I love the CFL. I've played both. You've played in both systems, US and Canadian. Love the Canadian rules, love the Canadian games. My fear is that holding on to those rules could also be the death of us, because we'll consistently have this problem of, well, we found one guy that could throw the ball, but the minute he's hurt, who do we have? So we either start really investing in the development of the Canadian quarterbacks, which I don't see the CFL doing. Historically, there have been some great quarterbacks that have come out of CAS and U Sport as it evolved, but never been able to take that jump, and I think it's because of an identity crisis.
And some of it, I don't think a lot of them were given that opportunity. Like, one of the things that always frustrated me, like going back to Brad Sinopoli, when he was the Calgary Stampeders. I mean, he was exceptional in the preseason. He got the game. He's completing passes. Yeah, it's not the grind of a regular season, but he showed that he had the ability to run an offense and make the read and make the throw. But then you get into the regular season, and they're going 3 Americans deep before they give that kid a chance to really contribute. And then one of the problems, the mindset about a Canadian quarterback that's never that came out of the CIS or U Sport. The second that they struggle, they're out. Right? You don't get that same benefit of the doubt as a guy that even played Division I AA or Boise or wherever these guys are coming from. You just don't get that same grace period. And I think that's exactly right. I think that's one of the things we're going to have to start doing is working with Canadian quarterbacks that already understand the game and really start building that funnel and pathway from high school to college up to the CFL.
And it's a very fragile thing, the athlete's mind, because even a Canadian that's getting that development will always sort of compare themselves to what's going on in the States, right? You hear the noise, right? Oh, if you were that good, why didn't you go play in the States in college, right? And so everyone handles that differently. Some people come out of CIS, and it's like, you look at defensive lineman that came out of University of Regina, I think his name's Akeem Hicks. Well, he didn't even stop in the CFL. He's like, I'm good enough to play in the NFL. I'm going down there. Israel Donajay. There's a few guys that come from the CIS that, they see themselves as on par. But I've played long enough and I've seen enough guys come out of the CIS, amazing football players, but you can tell that they feel like they've hit their ceiling of their athletic potential. And they don't realize just because, the psychology is that, I'm a Canadian athlete and I'm not going to the NFL and I don't think I ever will. And I used to tell guys, I was like, well, Bill Belichick will take a Division III dude that works his ass off to get downfield on kickoff and punt. He's no different, no faster than you. If he's 5'9" and runs a 4.4 and you're 5'9" and run a 4.4, you're the same person. You just got to believe it, but that person does, because that person doesn't see the CFL as a ceiling. And so, when we think back to Nathan Rourke, who said, my dream was never to play the CFL, his dream was to play in the NFL. It's not a slight on the CFL, but it's a really telling of his mentality.
Yeah.
And if more Canadian quarterbacks, whether it was CIS kids or kids playing in U.S. college, had that mentality that no matter what league they're in, they're going to try for the top, then playing for the CFL or as a QB in the CFL would actually happen more for Canadian athletes, because they would believe in themselves and the coaches would believe in themselves. But right now there's a situation where, Canadian quarterbacks coming out of Canadian schools aren't necessarily looked upon to be a franchise quarterback, maybe a backup, maybe someone that can go in and run a sneak, but not necessarily the guy. And within that athlete, there's that thought process. So a few things need to change there. And that seems almost more difficult than changing the rules and saying, well, we could just attract the best American quarterbacks because we play the same game. There's no real grace period for them. There's no real learning curve. They could come from college, come straight to the CFL, and we'll develop these high-performing quarterbacks and have a real exciting game. So I don't know where it goes, Sheldon, but the CFL will constantly be faced with this challenge if we don't address either the rules or the development of quarterbacks.
Yeah. I mean, that's just it. But I got to ask you this, because you kind of opened a bit of a Pandora's box. The CFL has been around for over 100 years playing the Canadian game. Is this time, is it even on the radar? Do we even start considering that the Canadian League starts playing 4-down football at some point?
Well, Sheldon,
because the reason I bring this up, about 2 years ago, a buddy I camp with every year, he said to me, Sheldon, you know what? If the CFL is going to make that next jump forward, if they're going to survive past COVID, they're going to have to make an adjustment to that American game. I love the CFL too, he says, but right now it's just a different game, and we're losing fans, we're losing talent to the 4-down game. At some point, does the CFL have to take a look at playing the 4-down game?
Well, Sheldon, I personally believe it does. As much as I love the CFL and I love the Canadian game, I was very fortunate to have played in that game. Sports evolve as societies evolve. If you look at the NFL, the overtime rules from a few years ago really turned people off.
Yeah.
And so many people compared it to the college football rules, to the CFL rules at the time. And the NFL made a change. And there's a whole generation of fans that don't remember the game being such that if you won the coin toss in overtime, chances are you won the game. Because now both teams have an opportunity to score. It's a little bit more back and forth. It's a little bit more fair. And when I look at that, they made that rule change for the better of the game. When I look at the CFL in the sports landscape of North America, to compete, to survive, to attract and retain talent, we have to make changes. Because I love that there are professional football teams in Calgary, Edmonton, Regina, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Montreal, Ottawa, Hamilton. I love Toronto. I love that those teams are there. And I wish for more. I wish for more Canadian teams. Now, if the CFL made a really bold experiment and next year said, you know what, we're going to play on smaller fields, we're going to play 4-down football, 11-man, and play the NFL rules, and those teams still existed in those markets, I think they would lose the hardcore old school fans. But if they did that over the course of 10, 15 years, there would be a whole generation of fans that wouldn't know any different, but they would sure be happy that there's a Saskatchewan Roughriders team, there's a Calgary Stampeders, Edmonton Elks, and so on and so forth.
So I'm going to jump in there. Like for myself, I would hate to see the CFL game be gone. I think it'd be a big loss to the sports landscape because I love the game. But all things do have to evolve. to your point about losing the hardcore fans, I'm not so sure that you would. Look at the reason why you follow a team. Well, I'm following the team because they're in my market. The Saskatchewan Roughrider fans, if they had this big announcement that in 2025 they're transitioning to 4-down football, how many season tickets would they lose? I think it would generate a lot of excitement, and I think you get a lot of fans would miss the game. And there's probably a certain element of fans that are, happy to go to games, watch the same old game they've always watched with 25,000 people in the stadium. But I think the majority of people would be willing to make that move as long as their team was going to benefit from them. It's an exciting announcement. And, you talk about the mentality of Canadian players. I think there's a mentality among Canadian football fans. Yeah, we know it's not the NFL, right? But it's good enough for us. We like it because it's local.
Right.
And I think if you start making that game and now you're a true alternative to the NFL, playing the American game, you could be a development league. You can also be an 18-year or an 18-game career league, right?
Well, and Sheldon, it's funny. You and I used to play video games. Our kids play video games. And, when we used to play, it was like, well, are you a PlayStation guy? Are you an Xbox guy? Are you a Nintendo guy, right? And everyone kind of had their little thing, and that's what they were. And they would trash the other video game system. And it wasn't until recently my kids play where the games started being cross-platform, where you could play the big popular game the kids play is Fortnite, a shooter game. You could play it on the Nintendo, you could play it on the computer, you could play it on the PlayStation or the Xbox, but you could play anyone playing any platform. And it became about the game and less about the platform. And when I look at it that way, football fans just love football. And again, like you said, that we might. I do believe there's some people that really would grumble about changing the rules. I mean, there's 50 years season ticket fans that know only one way. Just like it's hard to train the quarterback to play a new game, it's hard to train these fans to watch a new game. But when you incur change, you can also incur growth. And where we might lose fans, we'll gain a whole new set of fans. Because now there'll be that cross-platform where, this guy, he was a star quarterback for the Calgary Stampeders, but he could easily have become a quarterback for the XFL's Battlehawks. And the Battlehawks QB wound up getting a really good offer from the CFL's Saskatchewan Roughriders, and now he moved there. And a lot of what you see, if you look at soccer in Europe, all these Premier Leagues, right? They're all independent. They do have the Champions League that they play for, but for all intents and purposes, the players are plug and play. And I think if you can get to a level where the rules are the same and the players can kind of interact, what also happens then is that our Canadian players that may have never gotten a chance to get to that higher stage unless they were absolutely the highest of the highest and absolutely had the stroke of luck and genius to get on an NFL roster. Well, maybe these kids now have a better opportunity to chase that
a more clear pathway for sure.
To chase that, maybe they start as a local kid that plays with Saskatchewan Roughriders. Maybe it's Rob Bagg. Everyone knows Rob Bagg, right? The story, 2 knee surgeries, becomes one of the greatest receivers in Roughriders. But maybe midway through the career, one of the USFL teams says, "Hey, we want you to come down here," and that becomes a pathway to the NFL, and he winds up playing 3, 4, or 5 years in the NFL. Like, we don't know how that story's going to look because we're operating on different playing fields, literally.
So, I agree. That's actually, my stomach hurts when you say that. But I think the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that you've got to at least consider it. You also brought up video games. Now, I don't know if you remember, if you were on, you were there then. Back in the day, we used to go into Vancouver, EA Sports, and the big thing was we always wanted a CFL football game. What was the problem with it? They'd have to rewrite their entire game engines for the Canadian game. And could you imagine, I know when I was a kid, I would have absolutely played that game. When I was at Iowa State, I was on the first college football game on Sega. I obviously used to love playing myself or dreaming about making those next steps to the next games. The CFL's never had a video game. And I don't know. I just personally think it'd be cool if they could open up that opportunity. No, they're not going to redesign an entire game engine just to access 38 million fans.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So many possibilities open up. And again, it's not that I'm just callously discard the tradition of the CFL. But we went through some rough times, and we're still going through some rough times. We still have a situation where we don't have stable ownership across the league.
Yeah,
But it's not a thriving league. We had to go for a government handout during COVID just to keep the operations afloat, not even pay the players. So we're not thriving as a league. We look like we're thriving. We got a nice polish, we got a nice trophy. Everyone markets themselves well,
and a great game.
And a great game.
It's an easy game to watch. It's good football.
But we're not thriving financially, and we're not thriving where it counts most with the youth. You see behind me, Sheldon, I got all these helmets. I got some Grey Cup rings hanging out there, some footballs. I have 3 boys. 3 boys that played minor football. 3 boys that are constantly exposed to what my career was. I mean, I played 16 years. They grew up in a CFL locker room. And even with that exposure, that level of exposure, Sheldon, my boys could not name more than 5 people in the CFL.
Yeah.
And they don't even watch football, but they know everyone in the NFL. And so that's my house. That's a CFL house.
Yeah.
Imagine that the households where dad didn't play in the CFL. Dad is not a diehard CFL fan. So the CFL is not getting to the youth, and they're not making any money the way it is. So why not change it? Why not try to go something more uniform? You said it. They're not going to redesign a whole video game system for the CFL. But I promise you this. I bet you an XFL video game is right around the corner, because all they got to do is change the jerseys and put The Rock on the cover, and they're going to sell 1 billion copies. It's a lot of discussion, Sheldon. It's a lot. It's a lot to absorb. It started because of Macleod Bethel Thompson. I blame him. He started this discussion. Macleod Bethel Thompson is the one to blame for all of this. For all the problems in the CFL, blame the Grey Cup winning QB that left us for the Spring League. Blame him. Don't blame Sheldon and I. We're trying to figure it out just like the rest of you.
I'm a purist. I grew up in Saskatchewan loving the CFL. But, I think we're coming to a time right now where we've got to adapt to the professional football landscape. And I think we got to actually start having this conversation. Now, do I think that the leadership is in place to even consider something like that? No, I think currently they're all in on trying to grow the Canadian game around the world, which I think is a little bit ridiculous. Again, nothing against the CFL. I love this game. I love this league. But I think at some point we're going to have to look at getting on board with the rest of the world or forever be considered to the upcoming players and talent a second-class league.
Again, I agree with that, Sheldon. My last word is, if it does continue to decline, where will they get the money to keep supporting these franchises? It's always like they got a bootstrap ownership to get people in place to run a team and pay the players. And you see in Montreal, the league took over. That happened when you and I played with Toronto and Hamilton back in the day. It's hard to find people to invest in a product that's not making them money. Robert Wetenall, who was one of the greatest owners of the Alouettes that brought them to Montreal, and they were the Stallions, he was losing money hand over fist. There's not too many millionaires out there that like losing money. People that become millionaires don't typically become millionaires by investing in money-losing products. And I hate to say that because I love the CFL. So we have to get in a position where those teams in BC, Edmonton, Calgary, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, Hamilton, Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal are making money and growing within their communities, growing within the visibility of the youth. And the only way I see that, Sheldon, is if we make a real wholesale changes so that we can kind of get uniform with the rest of what's going on and be a sort of intermediary league between, maybe those leagues that don't pay the guys very well, which is the XFL and the USFL and the NFL. Maybe we could fit somewhere in the middle.
I'll call them audition leagues, and the NFL and CFL are career leagues, right? And I think you're right. And I also think that we're going to have to leave it at that for this episode, Chevy. These are one of these talks that I'm going to walk out of here, and I'm just not going to be able to get this out of my head. But I think change is going to have to be coming. I just hope that we have the leadership and the fan base within the league to be able to make the right moves to position the CFL for the future.
Well, speaking of fans, if you've joined us this long on the Chevy and Nasty show, or the ride with Chevy and Nasty, as we like to call it, give us your feedback. What do you think? Do you think we're out to lunch? Do you hate us now? Will you stop listening to us forever because we said the CFL has to change? Or do you agree with us and can get behind some change so long as you have a team in your local market? Send us some comments. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. And pretty soon our podcast will come out regularly. Thanks for joining us. If you stuck around this long, we're Chevy and Nasty, and we're out.